I am very excited to welcome here two people who have been the architects really of our recent adoption incentive program win. And I have Suzanne Roy, who is the executive director of American Wild Horse Conservation, and Amelia Perrin, who is the senior communications manager for American Wild Horse Conservation. Thank you both for being here today to talk about this very important win that happened just last week.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much for having us.
yeah. Thanks for having us, Carol. And thanks for being part of the lawsuit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Suzanne, do you want to talk about why the lawsuit was started?
Right. So it was challenging the BLM's, the Bureau of Land Management's adoption incentive program, which paid adopters $1,000 per horse to adopt up to 4 horses per person. And the only
Per
qualification
year, right?
per year, I'm sorry, per year, 4 horses per person per year. And the only requirement was that the horse had to be unhandled, untamed. And we knew from the beginning when we heard about this program. In fact, this program started way before this last administration. I believe it actually started in the Obama administration because I met with Neil Cornsey, who was then the director of the BLM, and he told me, "Oh, we have this great idea for getting horses adopted, adoption incentive." And I was like, "Oh, that is the worst idea I've ever heard." Because you don't want to pay people $1,000 to take an unhandled horse. Well, obviously, they had their primary motivation of the agency over all these years has been to unload as many horses as they can. They don't care what happens after title changes hands. They wash their hands of it. And I say that as like institutionally, they don't care. Obviously, there are people within the program that do care and have been very upset about it. So when they announced that they were going to do this, we sent a long letter and explaining all the reasons why they should not be doing this, and that it would be incentivizing slaughter, essentially, and creating a laundering mechanism for the government to send horses to slaughter through private parties.
Right.
Well, fast forward a year, when you adopt a horse, it takes a year to get title, right? So you have to keep the horse for a year. The BLM is supposed to do a compliance check, and then you get title. So 1 year on from the initiation of the program, boom, it happened. The number of Mustangs in kill pens skyrocketed. And unlike before, there would be Mustangs, BLM horses in kill pens, but they'd generally be older and horses that had been in private care for a long time and unfortunately just suffered the fate of so many domestic horses, which just get thrown away when they're no longer useful. But now we were seeing large numbers of unhandled young Mustangs in the kill pens. So we knew this was a problem. We knew the BLM was not going to stop it on its own. And so Amelia began digging in 2020, and she's going to tell you about her investigation to really document that link between the AIP and what we were seeing in the kill pens. But additionally, we looked for another route to challenge the program. And our attorney, Bill Eubanks of Eubanks and Associates, said, "I really think this is vulnerable because they just implemented it through an internal instructional memorandum, but they did not do any analysis or public comment as required by the Administrative Procedures Act, as well as the National Environmental Policy Act, better known as NEPA." So we decided to go to court on that issue as a mechanism to stop it, which was you broke the law when you initiated this program without any analysis of the impacts and any opportunity for public input. And that's what we did. You became part of that lawsuit. Your experience, which you can talk about at the Rock Springs, one of the first adoptions under the AIP, and your observations were critical. And we partnered also with Skydog Sanctuary, which has rescued a lot of hundreds of horses from kill pens. So we all went to court. and on the case challenging the BLM. And that was in when did we do that, Amelia? 2021? No, 2021 we filed the suit. Yeah.
Mhm.
So 2021, the case was all briefed and ready to go for the judge to make a decision. And it was on his desk for 2 years before he made a decision. So unfortunately, I don't think that's a personal failing of the judge. I think it's just testimony to the load that the federal judges bear in all the cases they have to hear, and many judgeships are not filled. So anyway, finally, on March, Amelia remembers all the numbers. March 3rd, the judge finally issued his ruling, and he agreed with us. And he said it was likely that the program was sending horses to slaughter, and he really leaned on our investigation as evidence. And that investigation, which Amelia can tell you about, led to a New York Times report, and those were sort of the centerpiece of the judge's ruling that he hinged it on, that the plaintiffs adequately made the case that there was a likely link between the program and slaughter, and that it should have been, these impacts of the program should have been evaluated and analyzed, and public comment should have been allowed. And so what he did was he basically overturned the program by invalidating the instructional memorandum that was authorized it. So it was a really big victory.
I think one thing that was really interesting in the decision is that the judge said that the BLM's the slaughter of horses was fairly traceable to BLM actions. That is something that is really strong. It's something I haven't seen before. And it was just really a testament to the advocacy groups that came together to investigate this program, work together to rescue the horses, get the information. And it was a really great victory. It was so exciting to see it come down. It's got really great implications for wild horse policy moving forward.
Yeah.
And I was really happy to see the current online adoption that just ended on Thursday, which I participated in. There was a big sign on the website that said that the AIP had been paused. So none of that is going to be happening right now until something changes. So I was very gratified to see that change immediately happen.
Yeah, just a day or two later, they announced that it was paused. So it was a very big deal. And I put in context of the history of the wild horse movement. I think, all of us, you and AWC, Skydog, we all earned our place in wild horse advocacy history, because this is like the fourth time one of these slaughter schemes has been shut down, and most of the time, two or three of the times now have been shut down through litigation, and they happen about every decade. So in the 80s, and every decade, the same thing happens. The BLM goes to Congress. The horses are destroying the rangelands. We have to have funding to round them up. So the Congress says, okay, we'll give you the funding. So they round them all up. They increase the holding population, and then they come up with a scheme to get rid of the horses. And so, because it's an end run around the slaughter ban that's been in place for most of these years. So the first one was a fee waiver for, if you get a truckload of horses, you can get a fee waiver. And that was like thousands of horses went to slaughter through that until it was shut down. The next one in the 90s was proxy bidding. So one person could bid for multiple people. And so people were walking away with, again, truckloads of horses. I believe in the 90s, they documented 20,000 horses went to slaughter before it was shut down by a lawsuit. And then in the 2010s, that's when the BLM sold all these horses for $25 a piece to Tom Davis, a known kill buyer in Colorado. And that was shut down by an investigation by David Phillips from the New York Times, who actually, at that time, he wrote for ProPublica. And he exposed the whole thing of how the BLM was sending these horses to slaughter through this kill buyer, and the kill buyer was he had all the paperwork. It's still on the website, I think, and the kill buyer was filling out his applications with ridiculous, completely impossible reasons why he was taking the horses, including he wanted the biggest stallions available for movies in Mexico. And all of those horses went to slaughter too. And then because of Dave's expose, it was shut down as well. And then Dave is the reporter that went on to write the report in this in this iteration of the slaughter scheme. And that obviously helped to shut down the program. So in context, this is, institutionally, the BLM is their end goal has always been slaughter. Well, I do have to say there are people within the agency that think that's a horrible thing and would resign if it happened, but that institutionally, that's been the end game for since the beginning.
Yeah. So, Amelia, you want to talk about some of the investigations?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Suzanne said, in 2020, that 1 year mark of the adoption incentive program, when adopters get the title or the ownership paperwork of the horses, our rescue coalition started reporting a really large number of unhandled horses and burros ending up in the slaughter pipeline. And we were like, that's the AIP. And so what we started doing is we started tracking these kill pens. Kill pens operate on their livestock auctions across the country, but a lot of them do operate on Facebook, very interestingly. So we were able to monitor their Facebook pages and screenshot all the horses and burros that were being put up that were identified as Bureau of Land Management animals. We then put them in a database where we logged them all by kill pen and when they entered the kill pen. And then we filed what are called Freedom of Information Act requests, or FOIA. So we filed FOIA requests on every brand. That's the identifying mark on the left side of horse's neck. It's an alphanumerical code that kind of unlocks their history, where they're from, where they're held when they're born, and who adopted them. And so we were able to get all those adoption paperwork back, and we started just putting all the pieces together. It was like a big giant puzzle. I mean, I literally have like a whiteboard with all the adopters' names and lines connecting them, but it was like a big puzzle. And we started seeing that not only were people incentivized, pocketing the incentives and sending these horses into the slaughter pipeline just days after they got title paperwork to them, they were going back for their second round of horses. And as this investigation continued, they're going back for a third. They were going back for a fourth. We have people that are just repeat offenders. I mean, just yesterday, I was looking at the kill pens on Facebook, and I was like, that's a name that's familiar to me. And it was his fifth round of animals. So we started to see this pattern happening. And then we wrote our first report with only 800 horses identified and lots of FOIAs pending. We brought that to the New York Times, and Dave was like, yep, you got something here. And so he started looking into it as well. And he wrote an expose, front page New York Times expose from May 2021 on the program and what was happening. That ignited congressional outrage. We've got letters in Congress saying, to investigate the program, some talks of defunding the AIP and all of that. So that was all around the time we also filed the lawsuit. So we had like all guns firing at this in the best way possible to take it down, because it was so awful. I mean, not even the horses weren't only ending up in slaughter, but we were also getting these compliance inspection records back. And it was incentivizing people that have no business, no idea how to have a wild animal, because yeah, they're horses, but they're actually wild animals, and they had no idea how to manage them. So we're seeing extreme abuse and just horrific conditions. One horse was kept in a dog pen. One horse was kept up to its knees in manure. There was others that were just so skinny. And so, they were starving, and they were repossessed by the BLM. So there's two issues. It was incentivizing slaughter, and it was also incentivizing people that had no idea how to handle a wild horse. And so we continued investigating as that kind of went on. And as of now, we've documented 2,000 wild horses and burros in kill pens. Of those, we were able to identify 855. Again, that's identified by the BLM brand. And we filed FOIAs on those. Of those that were able to be identified, we confirmed that 70% were adopted through the Adoption Incentive Program. And that number is, always changing because we are getting more FOIAs back every day. The more FOIAs we get back, the more number of horses that we are identifying in as AIP. So what we found is likely just the tip of the iceberg, because again, all we're monitoring is Facebook. And I always like to kind of give an example of I'm in Oregon, I'm in Eugene, and there's a livestock auction here, and they sell horses to slaughter. I went one day because I was just like, I'm just going to go check it out. I've never been. I want to experience this. I had no idea that I was going to find BLM burros there, or BLM horses. I had zero expectation of that. I was walking around the loose horse pen and I saw these two like very scared little burros like in the little corner. And I was like, those are BLM burros. And we just like jumped into action. My phone was on 2%. I was like bidding. I think I accidentally bid against myself at one point. And we ended up saving those burros. So if I hadn't been on the ground, we wouldn't have even known that. So what we found on these Facebook is just absolutely the tip of the iceberg. And then one other thing that we found that's like just particularly egregious is not only were people going back, repeat offenders, getting that incentives, but they were doing exactly what was happening back in the 90s. They were having groups of related individuals adopting the maximum number of horses and holding them at the same address. And they were going back and getting more. So we identified one family who had adopted over the course of, I believe it was 3 to 4 years, 82 wild horses and burros. That's $82,000 of taxpayer money. And we found about 40 of those animals in kill pens so far. So it's very obvious what was happening there. And it's really awful.
Plus the money that they get from the auction as well.
Exactly. And so many people say like, oh, well, $1,000 isn't going to, offset care for a horse. You're not going to actually make any money if you're just pocketing the $1,000. And like, that's assuming a level of care that these people aren't giving. Right. They're just putting them out in a pasture, oftentimes in the Oklahoma, Texas area where there's big swaths of land. They're just putting them out in a pasture. They're not caring for them, and then they're flipping them 1 year. So the majority of these ones we're seeing have long feet, no vet care, are very skinny. And so, yeah, they can absolutely profit off of that $1,000, especially if they're going back every year, especially if they're working with their families to adopt the maximum number and flip them.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah.
And so you were basically tracing through Facebook, but then there's other auctions that are going on that you didn't know about. So there's potentially thousands more horses that went through this as well.
Oh, absolutely. And the Facebook ones are even just the ones we can catch. As soon as they sell, they delete them from Facebook. So I had a really great group of volunteers. We had almost 24-hour coverage on these kill pens for a couple of years, which was amazing. But again, so many slip through the cracks, and so many are at these auctions that we're not on the ground at. And it's really just it was a horrific program that affected far too many horses and did send them to slaughter. And people like to say that these kill pens, well, they don't actually ship to slaughter, and they do. A lot of them do. They're self-identified as kill pens, and there are some that don't have direct contracts to export. But the ones we were working with, the majority of them had contracts with the USDA, which we obtained through FOIA, to export these horses and burros to slaughter. So they were extreme risk of exporting across the border to slaughter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just leaning into that point about how this was just the tip of the iceberg, what had to happen to be able to identify the horse was the kill pen had to post the horse in a way that you could read the brand.
Okay.
And then you would submit a FOIA for the brand to match up the records and find the horse's history. And or the horse had to be rescued and the rescuers had to shave the brand and, look at it. But again, these are unhandled horses. So identifying who this was and was in there was difficult. And then also, after we started doing this, the kill pen started blacking out the brands, blurring the brands, taking a picture from the other side. So there's no question that it's literally the tip of the iceberg. But I do want to say that we couldn't have done this investigation without the rescue groups that saved the horses and gave us the brand numbers to track, because that was a key component of the investigation. And I also wanted to say that, just to highlight the BLM's complete irresponsibility as an agency in sending hundreds, thousands over the years of BLM wild horses that are untamed. Like Amelia said, they're wild animals. You can't just take them home and put them in your on your property, right? They require special care, handling, everything. So by dumping all these horses into the slaughter pipeline, it put the burden on rescues to save them. Yes. But it was a difficult situation to save them because they couldn't rely on their traditional foster homes, because it required special facilities and knowledge to be able to take them in. And unfortunately, so essentially it was a public safety issue that they created, but also it spurred an animal welfare crisis, because what we saw was rescues doing their best to save these horses, and in many cases maybe acting emotionally without the ability to care for them long term. And so there were some situations of where horses had to be re-rescued. And it's just very unfair of the BLM to put the burden of placing these horses on the rescue community.
Yeah. And going back to, the BLM's complicity in this program, and everything that we found, we didn't just talk about on social media or in emails, or we presented that to the BLM. We sent our reports to the BLM. We sent the New York Times article, the congressional outrage. We all sent that to the BLM, and they continued to just wash their hands of the situation and say there was no credible evidence. They didn't even look at the evidence. They refused to even acknowledge it. And then I participated in a 3-part workshop, collaborative working group with the BLM, with a moderator, to talk about the pitfalls of the adoption incentive program, to talk about all these issues that we are finding. And we laid all the cards out on the table. We told them exactly what was happening. And rescues also said, yeah, we back this up. We've seen exactly this. The BLM, we came to a consensus that cashless vouchers would still be a way to incentivize adoptions while removing that just cash incentive. And the BLM has so far refused to release the report or release the findings from that collaborative working group. And so they really wanted nothing to do with the controversy. They were really just trying to get the maximum number of horses through that program before it was going to get shut down, because it was going to get shut down. It was implemented sloppy. It was absolutely an animal welfare crisis, and it was absolutely sending horses to slaughter. And they knew it was a matter of time before it was going to get shut down.
Yeah, and that's a really important point about the working group. I mean, BLM spent our tax dollars to hire a company that does mediation and facilitation of interest groups getting together and working on controversial natural resources, public lands issues. So they spent the money, pulled together a group that represented the diversity of opinions, and the consensus out of that group was switch to vouchers, veterinary vouchers, take the cash out, switch to veterinary vouchers. BLM already has a system for veterinary vouchers because of gelding. So it doesn't even require creating a new infrastructure. And that was the consensus. That was the report was sent to the BLM, and they literally sat on it, never released it.
Yeah.
So,
And I actually 2010 got a veterinary voucher for gelding
Yeah.
and used it. Yeah. So yes, I have seen those vouchers. And
Yeah.
obviously anybody who has ever owned a horse knows that your veterinary bills can be very high. And so veterinary vouchers are very useful if you plan to keep the horse.
Yes. Take
exactly.
care of the horse. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Shifting to veterinary vouchers would, uphold the spirit and intent of the adoption incentive program, which was to, offset the first year of care. Every horse owner out there knows that your horse is going to go to the vet in the first year that you have it, whether
Yes.
it's for routine or, whatever they get themselves into. And so this would be a way to implement a responsible incentive program that
Yes.
would help get these horses out of holding corrals, because we recognize there has to be something done. There's 66,000 wild horses in burrows and holding. There's more wild horses in holding than there are in the wild right now. And so something needs to change, and the BLM needs to invest in these responsible programs, training programs.
Training.
There was a
Absolutely.
own BLM memo that said that investing in training would reduce the risk of horses ending up in slaughter. Offsetting the care through veterinary vouchers, cashless incentives. And then we can't really talk about, getting adopting horses out without talking about the on range. Every horse adopted out makes room for a horse to be rounded up. So it goes together. They have to stop the roundups and stop the cash and really invest in in the wild management, as well as placing these horses into good homes that are going to keep them for their lifetime.
Right.
Mm.
Right. And I saw firsthand how the AIP affected the adoption program, because after the first in-person adoption at Rock Springs after COVID, I was absolutely completely shocked to see trailers down the road and this mass of people lining up at the gate, clamoring to get in so that they could take a horse. And I was like, I've been going to the adoptions in Rock Springs for over 10 years, and there'd be like a handful of people. This was ridiculous. And people were pushing to get in. They ran to the desks to go get their horse, didn't even look at the horses, just filled out the paperwork and took these horses. And it was absolutely horrifying looking at this, because it was clearly because of the AIP. It was not that suddenly people realized wild horses were great. It was, we're going to get money, so we want to make sure we get them. And then we had the tip trainers and the storefronts and taking masses of horses. And it wasn't at all about, I like this horse and I want to take him. It was about, let's make as much money as we can. So it was just really horrifying. And that's not the behavior you want of people who are going to take horses. This isn't the behavior of someone who's a responsible adopter and actually cares about the horse and wants to keep them.
That's so true. And as I said before, that your declaration about your observations played a key role in the lawsuit. That was very important. Yeah.
And that's what we were seeing. I mean, in these titles, they would have groups of horses that would just had like just one, number off, or they were in sequential order. And so you could see the people weren't actually caring about what horses they were getting. They're like, those four, I'm taking them. And they would just take them and put them out to pasture and then flip them into the kill pens. And then, yeah, the burden was shifted onto privately funded rescues to protect our nation's wild horses and burros. And it's really shameful. The BLM tried to do it again. And I'm really glad that we could all come together, all of us here on the call, and all the advocates out there to speak up and to take action. And we had this really landmark victory, and it really is, it's incredible. It's so exciting to see. And yeah.
Yeah, and I can't tell people enough that litigation is probably our most powerful tool in fighting the excesses and abuse in the BLM's programs for the horses. And again and again, that can be the last stopgap, the last way to stop what's going on. And clearly this was a really good way to go about dealing with the AIP. And yeah, it's terrific, and I so appreciate American Wild Horse Conservation for all the good work on doing litigation when it's needed and when it can be won and when it can benefit the horses. I've seen it over and over again.
Oh, thank you, Carol. Thank you. Yeah, well, it's important. We're lucky, first of all, that we have Bill Eubanks and Eubanks and Associates, who are the top lawyers, environmental lawyers in the country for public interest groups, and have a real expertise. They've been, as you know, they've been with us since 2012, I think, was when we fought the White Mountains spay, or was it maybe even 2011, 2012, 2011, when they were the BLM in Wyoming wanted to sterilize the whole White Mountain herd by doing surgical sterilization on the mares and gelding all the stallions. And that was our first litigation. I think you were involved with that then, I believe. Yep. And since that time, we have to carefully evaluate. People always say, why don't you sue on this and this? But we have to be strategic to try to file cases that have a chance of prevailing, because when you go to court and you lose, you have to weigh the risks, the benefits, which is calling attention to the issue. Basically, your lawsuits get press, right? But the risk is that you create bad case law that then makes it harder to win cases in the future. So that's why we're very strategic. We're not suing on every roundup that happens, although we would like to stop every roundup that happens. But we have to choose, and we listen to pretty closely to the legal advice from Bill and his team about which ones are viable in terms of litigation. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you can think of?
Do you want to talk about your personal story at all with your head injury? And it's kind of interesting, Carol, but I have to get Amelia's consent to talk about it.
Yeah. So I really, in 2016, I got in a car accident and I got a brain injury, and I was unable to read, unable to write. And as a writer, that was, I work in comms now. As a writer, that was really like a horrific loss of identity for myself. And I spent 5 years rehabbing, doctor's appointments all the time, and finally found outpatient treatment in Utah to restart my brain, start my brain. And I really came back to myself through the AIP investigation. It was the first time I was able to read anything. It was the first time I was able to write anything. And I wrote this big, massive investigative report. And so personally, I feel very close to the AIP investigation because it helped me come back to who I was as an advocate, as a writer, as someone that really wants to dig into this. And then it also inspired me to go back to school. So I'm back in school for journalism to do exactly this, to bring attention to these issues that are often underreported on. Nobody was reporting on this, and really expose what the government is doing, because every single year, every single decade, the BLM has a slaughter scandal. I was basing a lot of my work off the 1997 peer expose on the 1990s scandal. I was born in 1997, and I'm seeing the same exact thing happening in the current adoption incentive program. So really bringing that and putting those puzzle pieces together and connecting those lines and showing that this is something that is systematic. It's something that's the BLM's goal, whether it's explicitly stated or not. And it's something that we can rally around to bring together. So the AIP investigation is really close to my heart for so many reasons, because it's exciting to be successful, but it's also something that really brought me back to who I am and to my identity, and brought me to this investigative point.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. I'm very grateful for the volunteers that I worked with. Fantastic people that helped me monitor these kill pens. They were really instrumental in this, and really grateful for everyone that came together. And I think this was a good collaborative win.
That's
Definitely.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to have more of that.
I agree. I definitely agree.
We
Yeah.
need to have more of
Yeah.
that.
Especially with what we're facing with 60, I think it's 67,000 now, maybe wild horses and burros in holding, and the uncertainty at the federal level, and we have to be very concerned that the Project 2025, as we all know, which is the blueprint for remaking the government, essentially. The author of that is the head of the Office of Management and Budget. He has a strong role in the president's budget that will come out. And then the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee is not friendly to wild horses. In fact, Ryan Zinke is on that committee. He was the Interior Secretary who pushed for slaughter. So, we're closely monitoring the president's budget, as well as any interior appropriations markups. But we all need to be ready to mobilize, and
Yes.
we need to collaborate on that, because we can't have a million, you can see it in the political world. If you have factions and people aren't united, you don't get anywhere. So I think the stakes are very high right now.
Yes, we do not want to see those 67,000 horses in holding killed.
No.
Right.
No.
Exactly.
Really not.
It's a real risk. So, yeah.
Well, and I so appreciate AWHC leading the way in all of this, and I so appreciate it. And I thank you both for being on to talk about the AIP, because that was such an important win for our wild horses.
Thank you, Carol, and thanks for being part of it.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much.